Well, you got it tuned into the Zealous Podcast. I'm your host, Rocky Snyder. This week, I've got Jeff Ruiz. He is a physical therapist, strength coach, but he is also the director of rehabilitation for the NFL team, the Washington Commanders. We're going to get underway, but before that, click that subscribe button. Follow us on Instagram at Rocky_Snyder, and away we go. Jeff, I can't thank you enough for coming on the show, especially in the middle of the season. I was not expecting you to find some time for this, so I truly am grateful for you notching out. Of course, having a bye week with the Washington Commanders, it gives you a little breathing room. So thanks for putting me in this calendar, and thanks for being on Zealous.
No, I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on. Honestly, it's the pleasure is all mine. I've been listening now for a little while, and it's an absolute honor to be able to talk with you.
Oh man, well, it's definitely mutual. So I want to just get right into it. I mean, you're a certified strength conditioning specialist, also a physical therapist. You hold various titles and so on. But let's just start with how you chose the path that you're on, because we have a lot of audience listeners who are young athletic trainers, young strength coaches. They see what you're doing and they're going, oh man, I would love to be on the sidelines. I'd love to be in an NFL weight room and so on. So, how did you get it going? What gave you the passion to set this road in place?
So I would say that I was always interested in athletics growing up, playing sports throughout my entire life. But I had certain injuries, and it definitely held me back from participation. Sometimes I had like elbow injuries from pitching, stuff like injuries on my shoulder, etc. And I knew that I liked anatomy, and I also knew that I liked to train. So I wanted to try to go ahead and really recognize what I was able to do whenever I was hurt or injured. And I was always trying to figure out like, oh, am I able to deadlift? Am I able to do this or whatever? So when I got into college and I started my kinesiology degree, I always knew that I liked the concept of injury prevention. I didn't know much about it. And I was blessed enough that I had some of my instructors that allowed me to take kind of a deeper look into it. And that was some of their expertise as well, such as we have Brian Biagioli, who I mentioned to you before, who's very big on that. He's basically the head of the National Council of Strength and Fitness. And he was always a resource for me to go ahead and try to look at different movement patterns, et cetera. I still actually talk to him now whenever I go back down to Miami. And I knew that I wanted to be in sports to a certain capacity, but I didn't know to what realm. I didn't know that I always wanted to go up to the NFL. And that really started to come about, after I started training people throughout undergrad and then graduate school. I was acting as a personal trainer at my university's gym, but then I was also starting to take clients onto the side. And where I was having the most fun was when I was actually working with different athletes, starting to emphasize different jump programs, et cetera. I was working with a variety of athletes. I was working with soccer players, basketball players, a little bit of football players, and it was just starting to become into a groove to where I was like, oh, I could actually explore this a little bit further. So fast forward a little bit towards physical therapy school. My number one mentor overall was Dr. Louis Fagenbaum, and he taught a therapeutic exercise class there. And what he allowed me to do was, just go into the training room. So he was the director of rehab for University of Miami Athletics. And with that, he was like, yeah, why don't you come on down? I was in his class. He liked certain rationales and exercise progressions and regressions that I was talking about. And he was very, very open towards allowing me to go ahead and explore, the setting and see if I was interested in it, et cetera. Because honestly, for a while in physical therapy school, I didn't even know that I was going to go down the route of sports. If you're not an athletic trainer, then you're not necessarily going to be guaranteed like a spot in sports. And if I didn't get into physical therapy school, I was absolutely going to go ahead and pursue a master's in strength and conditioning and go down that route. It was just, I got lucky enough to become or get accepted into certain programs, and I explored it. But yeah, so he played a pivotal role in just opening up doors for me. And I started volunteering ever since. I have a classmate of mine who actually works with the Bears, who's one of the best clinicians that I know. Me and him would drive each other to go ahead and really, be the best that we could. And we were always volunteering, always in the training room from first year of PT school on. And his name's Tristan Askin. He's the physical therapist with the Bears. We ended up doing a residency together, like staying, because we were already working with football, and I was working with other sports as well. And we stayed on to do our orthopedic residency at Miami, because a big reason too was because we already had so many privileges that were allowed by the athletic department.
Sounds like a dream environment. So what was the best volunteer kind of position, and what was the wackiest, the most off the wall? Do you recall anything like that?
Oh yeah. So I would say, probably the best experience, everything as a volunteer that I could say, was I was working with track and field a lot. This was in the spring towards my last rotation. It was my last like actual internship, and I'd already known our track coach, and but at a lower capacity. And I had helped with certain modifications. I had helped a little bit within the weight room, but not to the capacity of what I was about to start to embark on. And that's Coach Amy Dean. I still talk to her all the time. She was an Olympic, the women's Olympic coach, I believe in 2004 or something like that. She's an excellent resource for me. But with that, she allowed me to work with a strength coach and just start to make like modifications, and really be in the weight room with them, because I had weight room experience, etc. And I was helping take a lot of the high risk patients, or the high risk athletes, or athletes that were coming back from injury, and making a segue into normal full participation. So with that, she allowed me the autonomy to go ahead and really explore certain things. And I was working with a lot of short sprinters and mid distance sprinters, particularly like they have a larger female group there. So I was working with female athletes a lot, and it was still relatively new for me at that time. I've been in the department for a couple of years, but not to this capacity. The exposure that I ended up getting was tremendous, and it flourished into an actual position with them throughout my tenure at Miami. So
Nice.
that was,
and anything that was wacky or off the wall, going, oh my gosh, table tennis athletes? Yeah, are you seriously? Anything like that?
I mean, you would get the occasional, like in the overall whole department, I would probably say you would get like an occasional, like just off the rails patient that it was, I would probably say, like non-scholarship athletes would get hurt the worst all the time, and I would feel bad, but you would get some crazy cases. So
Because they're trying so hard to get a scholarship, is that what it is?
yeah, I think so. It was just like it just happened like that, and they're trying to get a scholarship, etc. And I mean, some of the times, the things that were also happening in that like case and scenario was just things that you wouldn't expect from like a collegiate football setting or something like that, and so it would kind of throw you for a loop. But I would probably say I was blessed enough that like the wackiest position and everything was also my favorite too, which was working with track and field, because when you were like responsible for a group, it introduced me to getting reamed out by coaches early in the morning, and you're like, oh, you're not expecting that right off the bat, but it helped develop me into like a little bit more of a hard-nosed person, for sure. But yeah, so it was interesting, but it was also the craziest scenarios too. So it would be very early morning and just something wasn't seen eye to eye with a coach or whatever it might have been, and it introduced you to the real world pressures of athletics. To
Okay,
where
so I can totally see track and field and carrying over into football, but how did that occur? Uh, how was it that did you start doing some internships, different clubs, or were you hanging around Miami and knocked on the Dolphins' door, or what was that like?
so this was actually all at University of Miami at this point. So I was at University of Miami. I was still basically I was a grad student, and I was trying to go ahead and get as much exposure towards something that I enjoyed, which was the athletic department and the weight room in general as well. So I was trying to hop into as many situations such as lifts, etc., all the time. And then I actually had an official internship towards the end of my graduate school, which was it was 8 weeks, but it ended up turning into all the way to where I started my residency, where I was there 5 days a week, 6 days a week, until August, to where I started my orthopedic residency. So that was a huge component of allowing me to get my foot in the door to where I was already getting sideline coverage for the 2 years previously. So really what I was doing was, like, I started my whole career from and my exposure to athletics through uh, Louis Fagenbaum, as well as Vinny Scavo, who's a head trainer. And with that, so he was a head football trainer, but also a head trainer in general. So I would help out with rehabs, and then with any other sports that I could. Like, I was working with diving a lot, which I had no idea what I was doing. I like, my sister was a gymnast, so that was probably the biggest exposure that I had towards diving. But Coach Randy Abelman, he helped me out. He helped write a letter to get me into basically like the department, endorsing me, etc. And I was helping out with random things, but really it would be football treatments and football like rehabs early in the morning before class. So I would get there at 6 a.m. or 5:45, something like that, start trying to help out everybody in the training room, and then I'll go to class. And sometimes coming back after class, whatever, if there was something that was going on. But it just started to be to where uh, I was like relentlessly there. Same thing with my friend, and uh, he was my residency classmate as well as his classmate Tristan. So both of us were there all the time, and yeah, it ended up allowing me to get involved with a bunch of stuff. I would make a lot of different modifications with the football players in the weight room. I developed a lot of relationships with like all the different strength staffs that were there, as well as obviously the entire training staff. So
Ah,
yeah,
okay. And then just fast forward, like, how did you land a position with Washington Commanders?
so I was already the director of rehab at Miami, and they had an opening and they had reached out. Honestly, I was very lucky, and like, it just kind of transpired in that way. I ended up getting a random email. I had met some people from that staff before at a different like conference, exchanged information, and then it transpired.
Wow. And so
So
your official title with Washington is what?
is the director of rehabilitation.
All right. So you made your way up through the college ranks and with passion, commitment, and it pays off, which
Yeah,
is the typical, there's I don't think there's any different story with all the guests I've had on that land themselves positions like this. You just went after it full force. Here's what I'd love to talk about this, because you brought it up a few times, and making modifications and progressions for the athletes that are returning to play, especially like of course, with football, you've got contact injuries, but also more than non-contact injuries, kind of like your track and field athletes. And for that matter, I would say that your diving team as well. But what kind of progressions? Like for me, I have these three simple tiers. There's assisted, there's unassisted, and resisted. When we're talking in a very basic way of progression, can a person do a desired movement? Can they elicit a certain pattern, or do they need help? So if they need help, that's the lower tier. And then once they get proficient, we take a little bit of that help away until they can do it completely unassisted. And then we work with that movement. Can they do that properly, efficiently, and so on? And then can we start to load onto that system? I'm wondering, like, what's your kind of progression when you're talking with these athletes, getting these modifications in the weight room?
Yeah, so I would probably say that with the biggest component being recognizing the pathology that they have or whatever the injury that they're coming back from, trying to look at exactly very similar philosophy towards like how much assistance do they need with this movement? How much are they actually able to execute it without, a lot of different aberrant movements, etc. And then basically trying to go ahead and integrate them in a graded exposure amount towards like actually fulfilling like the entire movement. So with that, I'll probably say, so for instance, I'm trying to get somebody that has an issue with their ankle, and I'm looking at the entire system, like how is that going to actually affect them when they go to hinge, when they go to actually squat? Is there anything that I can go ahead and substitute it with an elevated surface, with something that's not, and just trying to go ahead and carve out what would be the least provocative, but also the most necessary movements at that time for where they're at in their entire rehab process. Or if I know that this person has a history of this, it's not necessarily trying to work against like avoiding that movement, but exposing them towards those movements that I feel that would be the most beneficial for them in a graded fashion. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that sounds great. So you're very well spoken, and you've come from an area that is not symptom based, that is not full of archaic protocols when it comes to strength conditioning, but also especially physical therapy. Just based on what you've been sharing here, I can tell that you don't pull out a Xerox sheet and circle a whole bunch of different exercises and hand it to somebody. You want to know how the foot mechanics are working, or what's missing, and then how does that affect the entire kinematic sequencing or kinetic chain, however you want to call this. And where a symptom might manifest is not necessarily where the problem lies. In fact, it's probably an area that is overtaxed and is complaining. So where else in this chain do I need to get working a little bit better? Where do I need to shift the focus so that we can reduce the symptoms that are appearing here or here? Is that pretty accurate?
Yeah, that's excellent. That's excellent. Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. So part of why I like to try to integrate both worlds and not just, oh, I'm going to hand it off to the strength staff, or this is just to athletic training staff, or this is just for the PTs, but for everybody to be working in conjunction with each other, is that so we're actually being able to go ahead and reevaluate that person on a consistent basis through, these more compound, like advanced movements. And like criterion-based progressions are only as good as what's been, prescribed by that person and what the actual practical clinical milestone is that you're trying to achieve, relative towards that actual case or pathology. So before you want to see somebody return to play from some type of lower extremity injury, it's not going to just be a regular functional test of a triple hop or something like that. There's nothing wrong with that. Just there's got to be a lot more of a practical application towards those clinical milestones that you want to see hit. It has to be specific towards that position group, as well as actually towards that patient and pathology and what those limiting factors might be. But usually before I would try to see somebody like progress all the way back, I want to make sure that their numbers, their KPIs, all these things are actually prior, like if not equal to or better to what they've been able to do from before. It's I'm not a type of person that likes to avoid somebody putting a barbell on their back or whatever it might be. I think that it's all relative towards the exact case, but it's some things that you can't necessarily just substitute for, such as like lifting and strength training, all the above. But, yeah.
Well, what about this though? I mean, we've got 360 joints in the body that move in three-dimensional space, and we're doing all these complex movements with certain movement patterns that are subconsciously more biased in one individual than another, mainly because of the experience they've had over their life with training regimens, with injuries, with surgeries, or a whole bunch of other things that can create compromised movement patterns. And you start loading that body. What kind of tools, what kind of vision, what kind of like a filter do you put on yourself when you're taking these athletes and you're saying, okay, you're just coming back from this high ankle sprain, we got you moving, the numbers are looking good, let's load you up, let's put that barbell on you, let's start doing some step ups or deadlifts or even some type of lunge action. What are you looking for in those moments?
So I'll probably say the one thing that I have to try to check myself with is not having a confirmation bias on, oh, that looks good, or that's going to look bad, or whatever it might be, and actually seeing and analyzing from like a complete perspective on how that actually looks, from like exactly what you were saying, from a multi-joint level, from a perspective of, I want to look from the ground up a lot of the time, but I also want to make sure that I don't negate, the actual way that the upper body's moving during these moments as well. And like, is there some type of compensatory strategy that I'm missing? So a lot of the time, just for more of an evaluative like process, I'm going to have them repeat those movements on a consistent basis. So I'm seeing that, okay, this is actually clearing up, or this isn't, or am I recognizing a pattern or not? So I don't know if that answers your question. I might have gone off on a little bit of a tangent.
No, that's right on. That's spot on. Like what, and then what kind of, do you have assistance devices, tools that you implement while they're doing their strength and conditioning, whether when they're in the weight room? Like, do you use some type of change in their foot structure, their environment? Do you use kind of corrective bands to draw them in a direction to fire up this area or to quiet down this area? Do you have any tools like that you kind of play around with?
Absolutely. I'll probably say, for the most part, a lot of the time when I am having somebody start with more compound movements, if I feel that they're safe and they're not too clumsy or etc., I will absolutely start them moving like without shoes, barefoot, etc., trying to see how they're actually looking, like when they actually hinge, what am I seeing when they're actually squatting, when they're stepping, like are they able to do this like with a flat foot? How is their foot posture looking, etc.? Are they compensating a lot? I will absolutely use bands and reactive neuromuscular training, stuff like that, to pull them in or out. Absolutely. Sometimes we'll go with accommodated resistance when they're getting higher on, offset loads, etc. But really, I would say like the biggest thing that I like to do is just overall look at the person from like a perspective to like make sure that they're not compensating on a significant level. Some tools that I'll use, I will go towards force plates, etc. later on, but I'm not relying on it. We'll play with velocity-based training and all this stuff, but it has to be, to where that person's actually falling along the spectrum. That's usually a little bit later on in rehab.
Hey, podcast listeners. I want to let you know I will be on the East Coast this January to teach 2 courses of anatomy and motion. The first course is on Saturday, January 21st at the Perform Better Functional Training Institute in West Warwick, Rhode Island. It is a full day of understanding closed chain biomechanics of the lower body. Following that, I will be in the South Boston area of Hingham, Massachusetts to teach a 2-day course all about upper body biomechanics as it relates to the gait cycle. So if you keep scratching your head about your clients or athletes' recurring pain symptoms, it could be a matter of compensatory patterns. Once you get an understanding of how the body is supposed to move, you can compare it to how your athlete moves. Notice the difference, what's missing, and then have a better idea of what to do about it. To register for one or both courses, go online to my website, rockysnyder.com. Click on Courses and Workshops at the top of the page and hit the register button. This information has truly been game-changing for me, and not just me, for many of the Zealous podcast guests as well. So I hope to see you this January in Rhode Island as well as Massachusetts.
So you mentioned RNT, reactive neuromuscular training, which just brings me over to like functional movement systems. So do you use the FMS, or what kind of assessment, SFMA, what kind of assessment tools do you use that carry over into with the strength and performance coaches? Like, what's your system in place with Washington?
So with Washington, we don't use the FMS as much. A lot of the time for an evaluative tool, like we will like have them overhead squat, kind of go ahead and see just certain movements, exactly like what we were talking about before. With like, I want to see how they hinge, I want to see how they bend, I want to go ahead and see how they balance in general, from like a static and a dynamic component as well. But I wouldn't say that I used to use the FMS and the SFMA a little bit more, like actually at University of Miami, and just bigger screens a lot of the time, but we've kind of moved away from that a little bit. There's certain movements that we do use, but a lot of the time what we are looking at more like is we will, if somebody, this is just strictly injury prevention and not necessarily coming back from rehab, we'll use a lot of force plate data as well as like NORD boards and just try to look for different discrepancies, but then different assessments for closed chain dorsiflexion, like toe extension, hip issues.
So with those discrepancies, like let's just take asymmetries, unilateral strength differences between hips for that matter, like the glute ham complex, how do you address that, whether it's on the treatment table or within the weight room itself? Do you rely more on bilateral movements? Do you rely on a more biased unilateral kind of programming? Meaning, if I've got one hip that is, we'll just say not as strong, not behaving like the other side, do I load that more to try and let it catch up with the other side? Like, how do you address these asymmetries?
Yeah, so one thing that I will acknowledge is that we do live in a world of asymmetries with a lot of athletes in general, and just general population. Yeah. But to a point to where it might be pathologic, that's where, all right, this is kind of the fine line between like, all right, so some compensations are necessary, but we also need to make sure that we're addressing it as well.
Yeah, so you don't want to take away their strategies for being one of your top players, right? You're walking a thin line, because you don't want to mess up what they're already doing, but in the hopes of trying to make them more balanced. So it's tricky, isn't it?
Oh yeah. So I would say that I do, specifically if this is somebody that is coming in for rehab in general, but like we actually do part of like certain screens to where I will get them on the table with like the whole team and try to go ahead and recognize like if there are discrepancies from hip to hip, certain table tests, certain measures. But that's like a large screening process at the beginning. But I will say that I probably would bias them towards like a unilateral approach for a little while, and I might overprescribe that side that has like a significant deficit if it really does look significant, and they're also moving with a lot of different aberrant patterns going on, and they're compensating, like dropping in a valgus, et cetera, all these different things like on a consistent basis. All right, so that's where I'll probably start off with a program to where I am biasing it into a little bit more unilateral work that would be predominantly on the involved side, and then carry into never really negating both legs though. So a lot of the time when I would prescribe something, I would go on with, predominantly unilateral based movement. I'm probably playing with the tempo a lot, from the beginning when I usually start to try to strengthen somebody. I'm playing with, a slow eccentric tempo, like a 3-1-1 or even like a 5-1-1 count. And then going further. And then I might implement like a bilateral movement as well, like right after in a combination, just so I can see if it's actually like how bad that bilateral movement looks, if it's something that they're shifting off of, if they're compensating for it a lot. Let's say they have some type of a knee issue, and I want to see exactly how like evenly they bend from side to side. And then I'll probably go ahead and throw in maybe something that's like a faster tempo unilateral based movement, complemented again with a bilateral movement again after.
So tempo changes really is you're undulating tempo to really help control and excite this neuromuscular chain reaction.
Oh, absolutely. That's probably one of the biggest biases that I have with exercise prescription. Tempo work, especially for somebody that is starting to come back from an injury, I feel like I've had more success getting people out of certain compensations with tempo work, because it's a lot easier for them to, shift back onto that side or load that side a little bit more if you're controlling basically more of the eccentric load by causing just a little bit slower of a tempo. And maybe also pulling them into a lot of different strategies that you could use.
And when it comes to loading, are you more biased toward the eccentric loading than more of the kind of historic concentric model that you would find with, let's say, powerlifting, perhaps, but definitely bodybuilding, that type of thing? So you're really looking to excite the muscles by eccentrically loading, because then they have no other option but to contract.
Yeah, I would absolutely say so. I like all types of movement, but yeah, especially at the beginning, earlier stages, to where I want to see somebody actually go about like being able to accept and absorb force, and like through that attenuation of force with a slower eccentric, and then being able to actually load them, and then recognizing that, okay, so I have somebody with starting a back squat. Well, I might start them at a box, but I know that they're going to come down to right above 90 at, a 4 count. And then they're going to pause for a second, come up for 1, see how it is. All right. If they're really still compensating, I might actually throw it into where it's a super slow. I'll lighten the load up, 4, 2, 3, coming up, whatever it might be, just so I can actually see that they're attenuating to that force like appropriately, and trying to get the most work that we can, even if it is a lighter load.
Heck yeah. No, I just thinking about the different injuries that arise, the more common ones that you're dealing with: high hamstring pull, high ankle sprain, inversion sprains,
Right.
with Washington, right? Like, are those your common injuries?
Yeah, we have about hamstring strains across the NFL are something that are extremely common. High ankle sprains in general.
So do you have like a think tank amongst you and your buddy up in Chicago, and maybe a few other PTs in the NFL, and you guys get together and go, okay, like, what are you doing for this? Or what are you doing for this? This is what I found is when working. Well, I tried this, and man, it would just wreak havoc. So I stayed away from that. Do you guys come together like that?
Occasionally, we definitely do. We've spoken about a lot of different pathologies. Usually in season, we don't. I'm gonna be honest. It's just something that we're both busy, or like a couple different clinicians and people that I know. But I will say that like that definitely does happen. So especially like in the off season, a lot of time, I used to do that like with different universities as well. But yeah, we do have think tanks, and then a lot of the time, what we'll do is almost like something similar to like grand rounds within our actual departments. And like at Washington, we'll talk constantly about different injuries, and then how they're actually proceeding like forward. If they're not looking as well, like different strategies that they might have been exposed to, or that we've been trying to implement, whether or not it's successful. but yeah, I definitely reach out to a bunch of different people. Just it's harder. It's harder.
I'm curious, in like in your early stages of your budding career, you're still in University of Miami, and there I'm imagining there was a moment where just the curtains were drawn, and suddenly you're blasted with sunshine of understanding, or you call it a light bulb moment. Here, I'll give you an example. Several years ago, I was working with a professional athlete, court sport athlete, and he had a recurring rotator cuff problem, and he had gotten his rotator cuff surgically kind of increased in tension, so it wasn't so lax, and it felt pretty good post rehab and all that. He went back onto the court, but not long after, it started reoccurring. And I think he went through the same process, if not two, maybe three times. And then he came through and started seeing me, and we started doing these assessments, kind of like we were talking about earlier here, like kind of joint by joint, but also from a whole unified, like integrative perspective. And the things that we found out were, well, based on his history too, he had fractured his big toe on his left foot. And in the early years, you'd be like, oh, wow, that's a bummer. But then I started thinking about it. Okay, well, if he wasn't able to load into it, that region, if his brain was saying, I don't want to go over there, I wasn't fully rehabilitated, because a big broken toe, no one's going to say go physical therapy or anything, most likely. So he wasn't loading onto that first met head on that left foot, which meant that he couldn't draw his knee medially, which meant that VMO and glute and hamstring weren't particularly set up to decelerate a whole bunch of force when he came forward with his right arm and loading into his left leg to swing his arm through for this ball return. If all those big muscles down below weren't participating, then that shoulder was asked to do so much more. And all the wheels started turning. I'm like, oh my gosh. As soon as we started to get him to load onto that foot and load into that first met head and really experience getting into it with various kind of movements, within that one session, his shoulder started feeling better. And I'm like, oh my God, I got to learn more about this. Like, so I know that was long-winded, and I'm sorry. This is not about you. This is about you, Jeff, not about me. I'm wondering, did you have one of those moments? Did you have one of those epiphanies? Like or were taught that? Like, because that's what I'm getting a sense of. Everything that you're saying is like, okay, yeah, it may be a high hamstring pull, but that's not necessarily where the problem lies. Maybe it's somewhere else.
Absolutely. So I would probably say the biggest like epiphany or biggest revelation that I had was when I was working with a diver who actually he ended up going to the Olympics, got silver medal. We were going very, very hard throughout a rehab. I had worked with him, for preventative stuff, and then he was always having these different injuries. But not to go into like extreme specifics of like identity of who the person is, but he had shattered his right foot from before, and that caused much earlier it caused so many different compensations, and it ended up getting issues into his back and all of these different things, to where like when I kind of just analyzed the entire thing, and I was like, oh, whoa, yeah. So he had extreme lack of ability to actually load throughout that foot, and it caused, especially with the constant rotation that he was doing towards one side as a diver, like it caused a lot of different asymmetries, and like certain areas that you would expect to be like very strong and move very well were not, and it caused a chain reaction. And that was probably the most interesting biomechanical case I've ever had, because he had a plethora of different injuries throughout the years, and even coming into me, he had all these different shoulder issues, foot issues, knee issues, and then it ended up being a serious back injury. And it was something that he had to work very hard for. And yeah, it was definitely, that was the biggest revelation of the case that I had.
Like the cause and effect, right? So I'm curious, this guy went forth and medaled, he platformed, right?
Yeah.
Getting silver. So he obviously had some strategies that that were very effective and got him there. So I'm curious, like, what was your approach? If you know that, okay, shoulder, feet, low back, I mean, it's whole body's talking. Where did you start?
So one of the biggest things that he was having like an issue with was there was like significant neural tension, like from when he was starting to develop it later. He had to go ahead and get into like piking, like pike positions. Like it's obviously extremely important for anybody there. So what we were trying to work on was like there was a significant uh, uh, disparity from his ability to basically flex his shoulder all the way, but actually incorporate like thoracic extension as well. Because when a lot of these divers, when they go to hit the water, they'll shrug their shoulders up real high and they get into a domed position to where they're actually a little bit more rigid throughout their thoracic spine. But with that, what you can see is that they'll load their lumbar spine in very, very like high velocity based positions and like really hyperextended. So they'll get spondies and all these different things. But with him, we're trying to go ahead and get him into like pike positions, but with a significant amount of thoracic extension as well, without actually, having him lose form or his ability to execute it properly. So that's like a very long story short, but
Yeah.
really a lot of the biggest issue that we were seeing across the board was his inability to go ahead and like extend his thoracic spine, which I think was a huge precursor towards like the shoulder issues and then the low back issues, etc. So that was a huge component of his rehab, just getting into functional movement patterns, but while also trying to be very aware of his thoracic spine.
Wow. Very cool. Very cool. Okay. So you're never satisfied. I get this sense. You're always trying to, you're never happy with exactly where you are. You're always looking for more knowledge, more experience. So where are your eyes directed in that regard? Like, what are you seeking out these days? What are you looking for? What are you interested in for your own professional development?
So I'll probably say more than anything now, I like to go ahead and explore more about sports sciences, trying to learn more about load management, force plates. Honestly, I was blessed enough that at Miami, I had some very good mentors. And, one person that really had opened my eyes towards force plates and everything was Brian Mann. So he was we would do different screens with them, with like several different teams, etc. But I really wanted to try to dive into that a lot more. I'm getting my PhD right now from Concordia, and like I want to try to explore force plates a lot more, as well as trying to look at load management, etc. So I was probably biased on in the beginning of my career towards like really trying to hone in on, I did my orthopedic residency. I wanted to try to get better at, a lot of things that were very practical with like case management and like rehab progressions. And not that I've stepped away from that completely or anything, but I would actually like to try to go into the realm of looking at more towards like injury prevention, as well as just enhancement of performance when they're coming back from injury, however it might be. So I would say that I'm definitely more biased towards sports science, literature, etc.
You're full-time director of rehab for the Washington Commanders, and yet you still find time to pursue your PhD. So you sleep what, like an hour at a time, or what?
Yeah, something like that. No, honestly, I try to make it as manageable as possible. I have a wife that is very understanding with everything, and I think like I've never been a heavy sleeper to begin with anyways, and my mind races anyways. So I would say that it's just it's natural for me to always feel some type of like haste like I need to get something done, because I'm a professional procrastinator more than anything too.
Oh, that's why I can show you my membership card also.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Definitely.
Oh man. Well, this has been a joy. I really have appreciated this. And I'm kind of curious, like what are the highlights of the position that you're in? What gets you up in the morning? What are the things that just give you the juice? I feel like also, because we don't sleep that much, I feel like I want to say this podcast has been sponsored by Red Bull or Starbucks or something, because I'm sure we live on something like that. But with your career, like what is it that just gives you the juice?
Honestly, knowing that I can try to help somebody achieve their dreams. Like, when they're coming back and they're usually seeing me, it's not just for injury prevention or screening. And like, I work with the day-to-day, like smaller issues and stuff like that, or different like things I'll help with within the weight room as well. But a lot of the primary concerns or goals of when I'm there is to make sure that when somebody is in their darkest place, they're actually able to go ahead and get out of it successfully. And they can have some type of solace that I'm going to do everything in my power to try to facilitate that as much as possible. So taking that into account, I would say when I did end up at Washington, I'm surrounded by amazing staff. Like everybody, I'm talking about Coach Rivera is a top 5 person in the world to me. That guy is amazing. Just everything that he's gone through, but then just his overall like outlook on life and the way that he handles everything. Like, he knows any intern's name, he's gonna know them from the get. He is like, he'll go out of his way to remember their name and like have several interactions. So coming in and interviewing with him, it was just like a breath of fresh air. Not that I was ever having bad coach experiences before, but it was just impressive just to see this person. But then like the strength staff, the athletic training staff that I work with is amazing. And we all work together as a collective unit. But then even the strength staff, when I first got there, like opened up the doors, Chad Engelhart, Brett Nienaber. But then, one of the things that I get to do all the time is I talk with a good friend of mine, Kavan Latham, he's also pursuing his PhD. He's a strength coach there as well. And we just get to talk shop, and he'll help me out with rehabs as well. We'll go through a lot of different progressions and regressions together. And it's just like an open book of what I get to go ahead and learn daily from guys like him as well.
Fantastic. All right. And then if you could address the listening audience of the young up and coming athletic trainers, physical therapists, strength coaches, like what advice would you give these guys and women? I don't mean to sound gender biased. What would you give these fine professionals that are coming up in the ranks?
I would say you need to try to make yourself as available as possible. Every time you say no, it's a missed opportunity, for something down in the future. So you say no enough times and people are going to start to not ask anymore. So I've been lucky more than anything that I've been blessed to be around such amazing, coaches, clinicians, throughout my entire career. But I'm also stubborn, and I knew that I wanted to try to get towards a certain level or place. And basically I just tried to seize every single little opportunity that I could. And I think that if somebody can go ahead and facilitate themselves to like be involved with people that they really admire, as much as they can, even if it's for small glimpses, like it will help you grow. And take everybody's perspective into account whenever you're dealing with them. You have to look at, like in athletics specifically, you have to look at the perspective of a strength coach. You have to look at the perspective of a trainer. You have to look at the perspective of an actual position coach and head coach as well. And then obviously the athlete. So those things, when you're not kind of taking those into account, is gonna hinder the overall process of getting somebody back, but also allowing you to to really have doors open for you. So, yeah.
Oh, that's great advice. I mean, honestly, that's just fantastic. And what's also equally fantastic is your willingness to come on here and share a whole bunch of stuff, advice, insight, knowledge, with a great amount of humility and modesty, and things that I don't think I have a card carrying membership to that club there. But procrastination, that's a different story. Jeff, I can't thank you enough, man. This has been so fun, and I'm excited for you guys. You're having a really good season. We're on the road to the playoffs, and you guys, looks like you may have a seat there, and I hope you do, because it's going to be fun to see how this whole game plays out this season. Yeah, man. Hey, one last thing. If people want to learn more about you, I'm going to give them the LinkedIn links in the description and so on. Do you have an Instagram post? Do you do any social media? What's the best way to kind of follow you?
Yeah, so I'm not as heavy on Instagram as a lot of other people, but I do have one for sure. So my Instagram's Jeff_Ruiz03. Something that you could also probably follow me. People could always contact me on LinkedIn. I try to respond as much as possible. Yeah, so I honestly, I can't thank you enough for having me on, because this has been a pleasure. And
Right.
learning from individuals such as yourself is just amazing. So I really appreciate the opportunity. Sure.
Again, truly mutual.
And that's a wrap for this episode of the Zealous Podcast. I just want to thank Jeff Ruiz for coming on, as well as thank the Washington Commanders organization for allowing us to have this conversation. I have a feeling he's going to be back real soon, because we were just getting started when the time buzzer sounded. Now, meanwhile, be sure to head over to my website, rockysnyder.com, click on events, and then go down to courses and workshops. And there you can register for the one-day closed-chain biomechanics course for the lower body at Perform Better's Functional Training Institute in West Warwick, Rhode Island. And then immediately following that, up in Hingham, Massachusetts, right near Cape Cod, south of Boston, I'll be at the Breathe Studio doing an upper body course all about biomechanics as it relates to the gait cycle. Now, human gait is the most functional, common human movement pattern there is. So if you're looking to assess your clients, why not use the most functional, most common movement pattern we've got? So I hope to see you there. And while you got your calendar out, look through for July, because the NSCA National Conference is heading up, and that'll be in Vegas, and hopefully I'll see you there too. In the meantime, click subscribe, follow us on Instagram one more time, and enjoy your week.